There is a war up there. It started on February the 24th this year in Ukraine, where the local army is now fighting Russian forces who invaded the country and whose strategic military plans are evolving to include ever wider territories. The Ukrainians are fighting with weapons supplied by Western powers, who in fact, without boots on the ground, are conducting a war by proxy against Russia. For a debate on this war, we have two guests today, Michael O'Hurley, political analyst and editor of Diplomacy Ireland, and Frank Armstrong, editor of the online magazine Cassandra Voices. Frank and Miceal, thank you very much for coming in this morning on this debate. And the questions that everybody asks about this war are three at least. You know, how long is this conflict going to last? What happens if Russia widens the conflict to the entire Ukrainian territory and beyond? Considering that Western economic sanctions are not having the desired effect, and that, on the contrary, Russia is using the supply of oil, gas, and grain as a weapon, are Western powers prepared to just watch and see and do nothing about stopping Putin?
What my point is that this might be something of a loaded question, that stopping Putin implies that Putin's Russia is not does not have recognizable interests, that diplomacy cannot work, that we're dealing with sort of Hitler in the 1930s occupation of the Rhineland, and that we, you know, that we must face up to a kind of what could amount to a kind of World War III. I think we can agree that international law needs to be reasserted around the globe, and that's not just the imposition of international law against one nation. We need to get to some point where we can develop international agreements where wars can be more easily avoided, where we can come together to solve some of the environmental crises that are emerging. And I think we're not heading in that direction, unfortunately. But I think we need to look beyond this conflict and try and imagine a more stable Europe, a more stable international environment going forward.
You're suggesting to give diplomacy a chance, are you?
Well, I'm suggesting that we have to give diplomacy. We have no alternative. This is going to go on and on unless we do so, unless we find, because China is going to continue backing Russia. China has all the economic might of the United States now. The resources of combined with the resources of Russia, that's a very formidable prospect. And most of the developing world has taken a very different view on this conflict. India is continuing to import Russian gas and oil. African countries are generally more sympathetic towards Russia. So in South America also, there would be people like Lula in Brazil are quite well disposed towards Russia. So you know, what we're listening to in Europe is quite a different, very much a pro-United States perspective. Maybe, you know, there are understandable historic reasons, particularly in Eastern Europe, why people would be very suspicious of Russia and very worried by the prospect of Russian incursion into Europe once again. And those grievances certainly should be listened to and understood, but we do need to find some kind of long-term solution to Russia in Europe that has probably been challenging policymakers for 150 years.
Frank, you're a great journalist, you're a good thinker, but you're entirely wrong. Let me say why. Albert Einstein once defined stupidity as doing the same thing over and over and expecting a different result. Turkey brokered a deal so that the world, including Africa, would benefit from Ukraine's grain supply. It's in the world's interest for that grain to continue to flow. The very next day after signing the agreement, Russia bombed Odessa with missiles. Russia's agreements only last as long as the ink is wet. The Budapest Memorandum guaranteed Ukraine's sovereignty and security, only for Russia to invade. This is really a simple issue. Russia can end the war today by going home. It is Russia who has breached international law. It is Russia who has committed human rights violations. Russia which has committed war crimes. It is Russia which is imperiling the environment for years and years to come by sending missiles at nuclear sites, at refusing to pump out the mines in eastern Donbass, which will poison water supplies for the next 3,000 years. Russia and Russia alone is the master of this misery, and we cannot continue to blame the United States or accuse people within Ukraine of being the masters of the European mind. Europe recognizes very clearly that Russia is a threat, and that Lavrov has already made clear that Russia's interests go far beyond Donbass. And Putin last year wrote an essay, a very long, verbose, and crazy one, almost like Hitler's Mein Kampf, in which he basically said he's going to reabsorb the former Soviet Union and Warsaw Pact countries.
Can I just come in there?
Yeah.
What you're essentially saying is that we are in a Hitler 1930s situation. Is that what you're saying? Is there an historical equivalent in your mind?
I don't feel a need to draw a historical equivalent. What I know is what is before my eyes today.
You did draw
men and women and children are being targeted by Russian forces. They're being killed in their flats and their homes far from the battlefield. In fact, the idea that this started on February 24th is itself a fallacy. This started 8 years ago. And we need to be very clear. This war has been going on for 8 years. It's only now that Europe and the rest of the world is starting to pay attention. And I guarantee you that when Modi starts to feel the backlash from his love of Vladimir Putin, when China sees its own economic interest imperiled, and Africa continues to starve because Europe's grain grown in Ukraine cannot reach their shores, their love for Vladimir Putin and his Russia will dissipate.
Okay, so wait now. You did, in our previous discussion, compare Putin to Hitler. I
think there are some similarities, but I don't think it's necessary to argue that. I'm arguing what's happening
let's
today.
not be disingenuous here, because you did make that, and I'm arguing that actually I don't think there is an equivalence between Hitler and Putin.
Show me where Russia has demonstrated that they're a rational actor. Show me where Russia has demonstrated that their word is honest. And tell me where Russia has demonstrated that when they sign an agreement, it can be trusted. Talk to the people in Georgia, in Sikh Valley, in Abkhazia. Talk to the people in Moldova's Transnistria. Talk to the people in Syria, in Congo, the Central African Republic, and every place else that Russia puts its hand. That Russians
you're wheeling out
a
lot of Orientalist tropes about the untrustworthy Asians who cannot be good interlocutors.
I've said nothing about the Asians being untrustworthy. What I've said is that Vladimir Putin and his Russia have proven themselves untrustworthy. That is their own authorship and theirs alone. If Russia cannot be trusted, it's not because of my worldview, it's because of their actions.
When you look at actually the Minsk Accords, which I'm sure you're familiar with, which the Ukraine failed to implement, it's not simply Russia that has acted nefariously.
Can we be clear? The Minsk Accords grew out of Russia's invasion in 2014. They had a gun to Ukraine's head, and I disagree that Ukraine didn't implement them. That's not the record.
Well, you disagree. well, that's not the case. I mean, that's fiction.
We'll agree to disagree.
Gentlemen, can I come into this? Here we have Michael, who is a firm believer in the wrong of Russia and Putin, and nobody's disputing that if you examine the situation per se now. Whereas Frank is trying to have a global view of the whole issue and put, makes reservations about the beliefs we hold about one side against the other. Now, I personally tell you that my opinion is that the West, and when I say the West, primarily America, are no angel whatsoever. We have historical fact demonstrating that. I mean, America has destroyed the Middle East. Now we have a Putin who, in fact, is getting all the limelight in the world for doing things in a certain way, for doing things which are not. I mean, the thing which worries me is that he's causing so much destabilization of people, economies, and now we have the spectrum of millions of people starving. Because of the grain situation, because of lies, lying when they have an agreement, they break it. So that's
Concetto, when I was a soldier, I was trained in many tactical capabilities. And in an active shooter situation, I was taught to drop to the ground on my chest and watch whose feet were planted firmly and whose were running. The people that were running were victims. The people that had their feet planted were perpetrators. Russia has their feet firmly planted on the necks of Europe, and the people that are fleeing are the victims. And if we want to be clear about this, if Vladimir Putin wants to show that he's a rational actor and believes in a rules-based world order, all he needs to do is return to Russia, put Ukraine back to its sovereign borders,
okay. So
and then negotiate.
United States has been doing the same. The United States has been acting the same way as Russia for decades in different regions around the world. Well, and okay, so what Russia has done is wrong, but it's the United States that created what the world we live in post-Cold War. They're the ones who breached international law completely, abandoned all, any respect for the rules.
That's a very simplistic view.
The CIA has been operating covertly all over Europe, all over Asia, all over South America.
Frank, we can talk until the cows come home about this. The final question before the time expires. Do you think it's going to last a long time, this conflict, in any case?
My view is that it will last as long as the United States wants it to, and that it will be the United States, the most powerful military nation in the world, that will decide how long it goes on for. They'll either continue supporting Ukraine, or they'll say to Ukraine, unfortunately, you're going to lose territory here, and that seems unfair, and it is unfair on Ukrainian people. But there are also Russian minorities in some of those places that will be.
Yes.
They'll want to be part of Russia.
But let's be clear, if they're Russian minorities, they can move back to Russia. Ukraine is Ukraine. Russia recognized it as a sovereign nation.
So would you say
the borders that are internationally recognized? And let's be very clear about this. The war will end tomorrow if Russia returns home.
But that's
it is not the United States alone.
Sorry, Michael, but don't you think this is a pie in the sky?
Listen, it might be a pie in the sky, but blaming the U.S. for its historic foreign policy does not change the fact that it is Russia. It is Russia and Russia alone. It is Russia and Russia alone that has violated the law and is murdering innocent civilians.
No,
and
it's
if they
not.
want the war to stop, they can go home.
You know something? I finished with this. Some time ago, I had the pleasure of meeting, a Ukrainian former major of the Ukrainian army, who is now in Italy, between Italy and Ireland. And I asked, what do you think, how is going to end this? You know, he said, who is going to end it? If Biden and Putin get together and have a good talk.
And
But
I would say that you don't cut a victim out of any settlement. And the idea that we're going to leave it to two superpowers to decide the fate of smaller nations is a mistake. It's historically been a mistake, and we have to show respect for Ukraine's sovereignty.
But
I agree with that. I agree with that, Micheal. I agree with that.
Frank, you and I agree on that, and the fact that broken clock is right twice a day.
who do I have to agree with? In any case, well, gentlemen, thank you very much for this.
Thank you.
Frank, good seeing you.
Okay, bye.
Bye.
Thanks.
Thank you,
Bye-bye.
Concetto.